The Pattaya City Expats Club is a non-profit social organisation and our speakers are volunteers. The club as such assumes no responsibility or liability for the professional reputation of or the quality of services provided by the speaker today.
We are extremely lucky to have Phil Robertson come back and give us another talk about, this one is about human rights in Thailand. Today is going to be about human rights in Thailand, and I don't need to tell you that human rights is an unbelievably important subject, right? And a lot of this is going to focus on foreign workers in Thailand. Now, we right now are in what I regard as possibly the luckiest country on earth in so many ways. Firstly, nobody's pointing massive amounts of missiles at this country. It has food security, produces more food than it uses, and also the Thai birth rate has plunged, right? In the space of maybe 25 years, the birth rate went from like 3.39 children per woman to 1.3 in these levels, okay? So it would have the massive problems that many countries have with not enough young workers, except because it's a very safe country and the exchange rate is good. Millions of workers are prepared to come across the border and work and fill in what would otherwise be a terrifying gap in the Thai labour force. So Thailand really has every reason in the world to be grateful for these workers. But as you're going to hear, there's all sorts of issues. I hear stories about people from Myanmar, from Rose, who's from Myanmar, and things like, well, these people came over, they went to work on a farm. On the first night there, a woman was raped by the farmer. This is the sort of issues that Phil's going to talk about. So I'm really grateful for Phil for finding the time to come down and talk to us. He's also just taken over a very responsible position with Foreign Correspondents Club. Yeah, all right, I'll hand you over to Phil. Big round of applause for Phil. Thank you so much.
Okay, I just had speaking of computer glitches, my computer just froze, and I'm like, oh my God, 5 minutes before the talk, you know, the computer freezes. Exactly, there you go. Thank you very much, Ren, for inviting me down here again. For having me here at the club again. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Phil Robertson. I'm the Deputy Asia Director for Human Rights Watch. Do you all know Human Rights Watch? Have you heard of it before? How many people have actually heard of Human Rights Watch? Oh, okay, good. And how many people have actually been on our website and read something that we published? Okay, so a couple. All right. So in any case, we are an international human rights organization. We're headquartered in New York at the Empire State Building, of all places. So we actually have free tickets to the top as well. We are working in over 100 different countries around the world. We work on human rights issues across the board based on the various different international human rights conventions of the United Nations. And, give me here. I have been working for Human Rights Watch for the past 15 years. Been based here in Thailand for about 30 years. And I wanted to talk to you today about human rights issues in Thailand, but I wanted to talk to you about them from the perspective of the most vulnerable. I wanted to talk to you about them from the perspective of people from neighboring countries who come to Thailand. When I started with Human Rights Watch, I wrote a report called From the Tiger to the Crocodile, which was actually the English paraphrase of a Thai phrase, Ni Sua Ba Jorake, which means running from the tiger, meeting the crocodile, literally sort of out of the frying pan and into the fire. And this was a very, very appropriate name for a report because it talked about the sort of things that migrant workers faced every day in Thailand. You know, people think about migrant workers, you're like, okay, migrant workers, you know, from Myanmar, Burma, whatever you want to call it, Cambodia, Laos, even from Vietnam. it's important to understand that these people are in our everyday lives, even if you don't necessarily recognize it. So if you're in a fresh market buying something, security guard, talking to someone who's working at a gas station, the hotel maid, the boat hand. These are people who, many are here as migrant workers, many have been here for many years. Increasingly what we see is they're speaking very good Thai, surprisingly good Thai, so that you wouldn't even know that they're a migrant worker. Of course, the Lao themselves speak very good Thai because of Lao and Thai are so similar. But I've increasingly run into Burmese and Cambodians, where the languages are quite different, who speak very good Thai. And you just don't know about it. The Lao actually now are increasingly getting 30-day visa-free entry. And one of the things that people didn't even understand was that many, for instance, Lao women are leaving Vientiane and other places and coming down to Pattaya, working short time, and then going back. So this is something that people are from all over the region coming to Thailand. And many of these people are ordinary people. They're trying to survive and make a living. Oftentimes they have elderly relatives or their own families who they are supporting with the remittances they send back. They are core breadwinners. And in places like Cambodia, this is a core strategy for survival. If you face a problem with a relative who gets sick or a failed rice crop or something like that, you have debt, send a kid to Thailand to work. Many people are paying off debts that they've incurred themselves or their relatives. And if you talk to these people, many of them are going to say to you that they're just trying to earn a nest egg. They're trying to get enough savings to go back home and start something. It could be a small business, like a restaurant or a shop. It could be a garage, where they fix motorcycles, you name it. And they say that they don't intend to stay in Thailand forever, just until they make enough to be able to go back and to be able to live as they want. And I think that's eminently admirable. And I think that's reasonable. And that's what makes the kind of rights abuses, deception and cheating that happens to many of them so outrageous and unacceptable to me. Now, the Department of Employment of the Ministry of Labor, which is in charge of keeping track of migrant workers and issuing all the paperwork, reported that there are 2.9 million officially registered migrant workers in Thailand from Burma, Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. Yeah?
Is it because there's not enough Thai people to do the job? Is that why?
I think there's a mixture of push and pull factors. I think that there are jobs available, but there are also jobs that Thais won't do.
Same thing, America.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's always a discussion that, in fact, if you didn't have Burmese in Thailand, a day without Burmese in Thailand, everything would be quiet. Yeah. But in fact, the International Organization for Migration, which is the UN agency that oversees migration issues and regularly publishes very well done research on migration in the Mekong, estimates that there's probably 4 to 5 million migrant workers from these 4 neighboring countries in Thailand, which means that as many as 40% of the people who are migrants here are not documented. They don't have official documents. They have crossed the border illegally. They are subject to immediate arrest and deportation. And so many of these migrant people who you may be interacting with every day are in fact incredibly vulnerable. And this vulnerability, and runs right into directly into a wall of powerlessness that they feel, this vulnerability, and the impunity to abuse them. Because Thai government officials and employers, and in fact, in many cases, ordinary Thais, know that they can abuse them without facing any serious consequences. Ren and I were talking over a cup of coffee this morning, And I was explaining to him that, you know, in times when there's disputes within Thailand, you know, it's not like different Thai people immediately run to the courts and say, okay, I'm going to solve this in the court, you've done something illegal. What in fact you have is you have competing networks of influence. You know, you may know the police colonel, but I know the army general, right? Those networks of influence are very important in sort of solving things. It's an informal way of acting. But the reality is that the migrant workers there don't have those influence networks. They don't have anybody in their corner. So, you know, if they have a conflict with a Thai person, they're facing very serious consequences. You know, that person could call the police on them, and the police come arrest them, and they could face fines, imprisonment, and deportation. Basically ruin their lives. Very easily. And let me tell you a couple stories to illustrate my point. And this is from research that Human Rights Watch did, that I did actually. I met a Mon woman from Mon State in Burma. Her name was, I'm giving her the name A.A. Ma. In fact, that's a pseudonym. And she went through what can only be described as one of the most hellacious experiences you can imagine. So she and her husband came from Mon State to Phang province, you know, north of Phuket. They left 2 of their children behind. Both were, I think, 12, 13 years old, with her mother in Mon State. And what they were doing is coming over to Thailand to earn money for school fees and other things that they needed in Mon State. They didn't speak any Thai. So there's a limited number of jobs that they can get not speaking any Thai. And in this case, there are a lot of rubber plantations in Phang. So they got job as rubber tappers. And one of the advantages of being a rubber tapper is actually you live in the plantation. So, you know, you don't have a lot of expenses. So whatever they were earning, they were be able to save and send back. Now, as you may know, when you do rubber tapping, it happens at night. Because that is the time when it's cooler, the sap in the rubber tree flows more easily, and so that is when you cut the trunks of the rubber. And so you have to be out there at like 3 in the morning. And I don't know if you've ever been in a rubber plantation, but at 3 in the morning, it is pitch dark. It is as dark as you can imagine. You know, I mean, the trees have a pretty solid canopy, so you're not even going to see sunlight or moonlight. It is just like being in a cave. And so they have to wear these headlamps so they can see where they're going and do the work. And so they went out into the rubber plantation that night like they had done many, many times before. And, you know, at 3 in the morning. And occasionally they would see, when they were out there, they would see other headlights, but they would think, okay, maybe that's another rubber tapper, maybe that's someone like a hunter or something like that, whatever. You know, but they never paid it any mind. That night, however, they saw 2 headlights. And the headlights came pretty directly towards them. And it turned out it was 2 Thai men, and both of them were armed with hunting rifles. And they were wearing balaclavas, you know, over their face, so you couldn't really see their face. And they immediately demanded money from the husband. Give us your money. And as best as he could explain, her husband Cho basically said, we don't have any money. We're rubber tappers. We don't have any money. Well, they didn't like that response, so they shot him in the face, killed him. Boom, bang, right in the face, right in front of her. And then they immediately pounced on her, threw her to the ground, ripped off her clothes, and raped her. Both of them raped her. There was no money. They didn't have any money. These are rubber tappers. I mean, if they were going to have money, the money would be back in their hut. But you know, I mean, nothing. So they raped her. She was scared to death. Obviously, she was in shock because she'd just seen her husband killed, and she was concerned that they were going to kill her next. So she said that she recalled just yelling the entire time, "Please don't kill me! Please don't kill me! Please don't kill me!" But she's not speaking Thai, so they didn't know what she's saying. In any case, when they were finished, they took her husband and her headlamps. They took their two rubber cutting knives, and they wandered away, leaving her raped, in shock, in the dark, in the deathly dark of a rubber plantation, naked. So she had to basically make her way for more than a kilometer through the dark, and everybody, of course, is worried about snakes. You're worried about all sorts of things that happen in the rubber plantation at night that are just natural creatures. But anyway, she managed to find her way to another rubber tapper's hut. And she was able then, through them, to call a Thai non-governmental organization, NGO. And the Thai NGO then basically came out and investigated. They called the police. And oftentimes this is what you have, is that the migrant workers are not brave enough to engage with officials, Thai officials, unless they have some intermediary like a Thai NGO who's prepared to help them. The police came. They took away the husband's body. They found 2 used condoms, which they took as evidence. They promised to do a DNA test. It was never done. Local villagers, including the former sub-district chief who was the owner of the plantation where A.A. Ma and her husband worked, said that he knew who had probably done it. That, in fact, there were these 2 men from another nearby village who had been involved in things like that in the past. But there was no investigation. She was widowed. She was out of hope. She lost her husband. And so finally, after waiting for an investigation that never took place, she went back to Mon State. And before she left, she told me, quote, "If the police really want to arrest the men that did it, then they can do it. But they do not want to do it. I am Burmese and a migrant worker. That is why the police have done nothing for me. That's why the police don't care about this case. I feel really bad about all of this. Really, I can't do anything. My husband and I are only migrant workers, and we have no rights here." Astonishingly, 2 years after I did that interview, I met her again. I got word that she had actually come back to Samut Sakhon this time. She had gone back to Mon State. She couldn't make ends meet. She had to come back to Thailand. Despite what happened to her, she had to come back to Thailand. And I interviewed her again, this time near a factory where she worked in Samut Sakhon. She was undocumented. She had no documents. She had crossed the border illegally. And her teenage son, who was 15 years old, had come with her to seek work. But she told me she drew the line about allowing her daughter to come. She said, quote, "Thailand is too dangerous for girls." This kind of failure to investigate crimes is all too common. As I mentioned, the Thai people, ordinary people even have connections and influence, but migrant workers don't. And unless you have a Thai NGO that is prepared to step up and help, then usually nothing happens. In fact, I can point out the various different areas in Thailand where you're most likely to see cases come up to the police and others, because I know that they're where the Thai NGOs are that are working with migrant workers. Places like Ranong, places like Samut Sakhon, like Trat. But these are because there are Thai NGOs there. And the migrant workers have learned that they can confidentially go there with a problem and seek assistance. I mean, in fact, they're trying to build their own influence networks to be able to try to hold people accountable. But oftentimes it doesn't happen. And part of the problem also is a lot of times it's the police themselves that are committing the abuses, or at a minimum, deliberately looking the other way. So we documented a case, for instance, of a Burmese guy who came to Ranong, in the south, right across the border from Myanmar. He was actually a Burmese kid that was on break from school. And he had come over to Ranong for a couple weeks to try to earn money, just working local jobs, and then he was going to go back. But he didn't speak Thai. He didn't know what was going on. And he was accosted by 2 police on the street. He didn't understand what they were saying to him. They beat him, kicked him in the chest, and killed him. All the other migrant workers in the area saw it, but none of them were prepared to intervene because they were too scared of the police. A couple hours later, a rescue foundation comes by, picks up the body, and that's that. And the family back in Myanmar, probably just got note that, yeah, we know, he went to Ranong to find work, but he died. No explanation. I interviewed a guy who was actually a Burmese Israeli. He was a Luk Krung. And he was what we call a sort of gang assistant for police in the 48-kilometer area. It's called 48 kilometer because it's 48 kilometers outside of Mae Sot in Tak province. And in that area, this guy was working for a senior sergeant major who was in charge of the police gang that controlled that area. Anything that went through that area was his. So for instance, if you are someone smuggling people in from the border and you cross that area, you need to pay him. If he finds that you went through there with a group of people, he's going to grab the broker or grab the migrants who are with that broker and beat them up. If it happens the first time, you get beaten. If it happens the second time, you end up in a ditch somewhere. This is what he was telling me. There is a what we call a police box, the little sort of police booth at 48 kilometer. In the back of the police box, there was a small cell, and then there was a back room with a bed. This guy told me that he knew of at least 20 rapes that had been committed by police in that police station. That any sort of Burmese migrant worker who was arrested there, who was young and attractive, faced possible rape. And the ones that the police liked, they'd say, well, okay, you can stay with me now, you'll become my mistress. And then they would have a bunch of them at the police station who would clean up and take care of things and things like that. Unbelievable. But this was the police. Arresting and beating people to get money. This guy also, he was an intermediary where, for instance, like if someone was arrested and the police were demanding a bribe for release, you don't deal directly with the police. They don't want to have that evidence happen. What they want to do is they want to have an intermediary. And this guy, who was the Burmese guy, was an intermediary. So, say so-and-so's daughter is being held and abused at the police station. Mom and dad want to get her out. They would go to him and say, okay, what do we need to pay in order to get her out? And there would be a negotiation. The money would be paid to this intermediary, this guy that I interviewed, and then he would pay the police and then the release would happen. Now, he ultimately had a falling out with the police himself, where the police decided that he wasn't loyal, so they beat him up. He faced a mock execution. I mean, you talking to this guy, I did a 6-hour interview with this guy, and then corroborated with other people. It is surreal. It is like Wild West. And this is what is happening to Burmese on the border. Another case from another border. So Ubon Ratchathani, there's a place called Chongmek. In Laos, they call it Dawkhet. This is the cross-border area in Ubon Ratchathani going into Laos, one of the major border crossings. And it's a market area. It also has a lot of karaokes. And so what happens is there's a lot of young Lao women and girls who end up working in the karaoke. And they're sex workers as well. And what happened is I was going there to interview these women and girls to find out what what was going on with them, you know, what possible abuses they were facing. And I was working with a local NGO, and I was told, okay, they have a drop-in center, which because these women and girls were not getting health services from the Thai Health Ministry of Public Health, they had to get it informally, and so they were getting it from this NGO. And I was said, okay, we'll get there tomorrow morning, and there'll be 5 or 6 girls there, and you can interview them about what's going on. And I said, fine, okay. We get there in the morning, there are like 25 girls there, and more milling around outside. What happened? Well, what had happened is the night before, the Criminal Suppression Division had a platoon that drove all the way from Korat to Ubon Ratchathani and started raiding the karaokes. And evidently what happened is the bribes that had been paid by the karaoke owners to the local police had not been sent to the Criminal Suppression Division as it should be. So the Criminal Suppression Division decided to take matters in their own hands. And so, needless to say, there was a lot of people to interview. Good for me, but not good for the women and the girls, because a number of them were arrested, and all the rest of them had run away and hidden. And during the course of the interviews on that Saturday, we kept getting updates because there was a negotiation going on between the Criminal Suppression Division and the sort of collective of karaoke owners about what they were going to have to do to reopen the karaokes on Saturday night. And about 6 o'clock, the deal comes through. What's the deal? Well, the karaoke owners have to basically provide free housing, free accommodation for the police for the rest of the weekend. They have to provide all the liquor and cigarettes that they want. They had to pay them 100,000 baht in cash. And there were 7 policemen, so they said, you have to find 7 girls and send them to us for the weekend. And that was the deal. This is the Thai police when it comes to dealing with migrant workers. You know, they treat these people like walking ATMs. You know, it is amazing that these people who are earning, many of them less than the minimum wage, you know, living in very squalid conditions, are the ones who are being targeted for this kind of extortion. When I there was a guy named Tim Shearer. I don't know if you know him. He was his last post was the U.S. Consul General in Thailand, retired about 6 or 7 years ago. But for a period of time, he was the labor reporting officer and working on human trafficking issues for the U.S. Embassy. And he told me this story. You know, he speaks very good Thai. He told me the story where he found to Ranong to interview a bunch of migrant workers. And he was in this migrant worker room. And it was, you know, this is a room which is quite small, but, you know, and he was over in the corner of the room. And the door was over here, he was over there. And people were telling them about all the abuses that they were facing, all the issues that are coming up. And he said to me, you know, we were in the middle of this conversation, and all of a sudden we hear a bang, 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 bang on the door. And people stop talking and look over. And then some Thai yelling, and then bang, 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 bang. So finally, the migrant workers get up and they open the door. And it was literally, you know, so it was, the room was full, so it wasn't like these guys could come in. And what it was 2 drunk Thai police officers. And evidently they were in the middle of a binge and run out of money, so decided to go get some more. And so that was why they were banging on the door, to demand money. Well, Tim, who's like 6'2", hears what's going on, and he's over in the corner. They don't really see him, so he stands up and says in perfect Thai to them, "Who are you and what are you doing here?" And these guys were like, confronted with this tall, 6'2", white American speaking Thai. They're like, you can't be here. What are you doing here? And stuff like that. And he pulls out his card with the U.S. Embassy thing on that and hands it to them. It flips it around so it's the Thai side. And they look at it, and they look at each other, and they run. And the Burmese workers started cheering. It was the biggest thing they'd ever seen. They'd never seen this before, because they were used to facing this kind of extortion on a daily basis. The stories go on and on and on. There's a sort of hierarchy, actually, of migrant stops. You may ask yourself, well, why do the migrant workers put up with this? Why do they not resist? Well, because if a migrant worker gets stopped by the side of the road by the police, and they're able to pay the bribe right there, that will be the lowest amount of money. Could be like 2,000, 3,000 baht, and they get free and get loose. However, if they get taken to the police station, it goes up. And if they get taken to the court, God forbid, it goes up even further. So there's a hierarchy of extortion, that the further you get sucked into the Thai justice system, the more pain and more money you have to pay. It's pervasive. I mean, these are the migrant workers. When I was doing interviews with migrant workers in Phang after the 2004 tsunami, many of them were in Khao Lak, which was the area, of course, that was hardest hit. And Khao Lak at that time was a really boom town. There was a lot of construction. It was all Burmese migrant workers who were constructing those things there. They heard that morning the yelling and screaming. And the migrant workers, I said, what did you think? And he said, we thought it was a police raid. They didn't think it was a tsunami. They thought it was a police raid, because that's what they experience on a regular basis. And the Thai system facilitates this. You know, workers are not allowed, according to the Labor Relations Act in 1975, to form unions. In fact, I think none of us in this room are empowered by that act to form unions, unless you're a Thai national. I'm not allowed to form a union, and it says so in the law. It says the only people who can form unions must be Thai nationals, which is blatantly discriminatory, has been the subject of many discussions at the UN, at the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, and certainly at the International Labor Organization. But Thailand refuses to fix it, because allowing workers to organize themselves to be able to defend themselves would undo this whole atmosphere of impunity, abuse, extortion that the police and employers benefit from. So, you know, this is what we're looking at from the migrant workers. And there's a lot of issues and questions I can certainly discuss there. But I wanted to also talk a little bit about something that's come up very new. And this is the whole issue of transnational repression. What we have found over the years, and this has particularly come up since after the military coup in 2014. Thailand has traditionally been a country where people can flee to. You know, it's fairly loose. You can move around, you know, if you have money or you have connections. And a lot of refugees have come here. But what we have found, in fact, over the past decade, is that the Thai government has started to view these refugees, particularly people who are political activists fleeing to Thailand, as potential bargaining chips of value in doing deals with other countries. You know, this term transnational repression, which has come up, you know, some of it sometimes is referred to as extraterritorial repression. It describes efforts by governments or their agents to silence or deter dissent by committing human rights abuses against their own nationals or former nationals outside their territorial jurisdiction. And what we see is surveillance, harassment, violence, abductions, enforced disappearances, forced returns, harassment. But a lot of times what this is doing is it's being done like the Cambodian government working with the Thai government, or the Vietnam government working with the Thai government, or the Lao government working with the Thai government. And without going into too many cases, because I could actually talk about this all day, to be honest, you know, we've seen numerous cases of people facing problems. We had Did anybody ever hear of the case of Gui Minhai, the Chinese, who is also a Swedish national, who was abducted in Pattaya? Yes, in 2015. So this guy was a book writer and a publisher from Hong Kong. He had actually come to Pattaya because he thought it would be safe here. He was abducted in Pattaya, missing for many months, and then suddenly stows up on Chinese state TV in January 2016, claiming that he was involved in a drunken driving incident in China, and that's where he had been all the time. What we saw was, in fact, he was sort of taken out of his condo with a group of people and disappeared. We've seen other cases where we had Chinese nationals like Jing Yefei and Dong Wenping, who were people who had come into Thailand after serving sentences in China. They had fled China. They had gone to the UN refugee office, the UNHCR, and been recognized as refugees. They were with their families on a Thursday where the Canadian ambassador had sent letters to the Ministry of Interior, the Attorney General's office, the Immigration, National Security Council, saying, okay, these are the cases that we have. We're going to be taking them to Canada on Tuesday. You guys already know about this. Everything's fine. That Thursday, these guys were arrested. On Saturday, they were visited by Chinese officials in immigration lockup. And then they were put on a plane and sent back to China. Blatant example of Thai government knowing exactly what was happening and then basically doing a deal with China to send them back. Prawit Wongsuwan, who is the deputy prime minister, you know, who was just dressed in looking like a cherry up country, he looked, you know, sort of a general and a political party leader. He, you know, was criticized because, I mean, it was his office that sort of overseeing this stuff. UNHCR sent a letter criticizing this whole thing that happened. He calls in UNHCR, and UNHCR talks to me beforehand, and they said, okay, we're going into the woodshed, guys. We're going to get a whipping for giving them a hard time. When they get in there, Prawit says, oh, I didn't know they were refugees. If I had known they were refugees, I would have never sent them anywhere. Yeah, right. You know, lying straight to their face. This is the sort of thing that happened. We had a case of these Uyghurs, the people from Xinjiang, who have, you know, fled forced relocation, crimes against humanity, all these things, where there was approximately 220 of them who were arrested down on the southern border. This was in 2014, coming up on the 10th anniversary of that arrest. The Thais, you know, there was a lot of pressure, like, let them go to a third country, let it be. The Chinese wanted them sent back. So the Thais sent the women and children to Turkey, where they wanted to go, where they claimed that they were nationals of, even though they weren't. And then the next week, China sent down a plane with armed police. And there's this video and this thing of all these Uyghurs in chains with blindfolds, each of them accompanied by a People's Armed Police member from China being flown back. It was a deal. They cut a deal with China. And they sent these people back. We've never seen any of them again. They've just disappeared into the maw of the beast. Case after case after case of this. We have deals between the Cambodians and the Thais on what is known as a fugitive arrangement that permits the exchange of each other's fugitives. And within months of this taking place, we saw a huge uptick of Cambodian dissidents facing surveillance, arrest, and forced return to Cambodia. These are people who are human rights activists. They were people involved with the political opposition, which has now been crushed in Cambodia. And they fled here to Thailand. They got UNHCR status. They had UNHCR cards. And they faced these things anyways. One of the guys was a friend of mine, a guy named Suan Chamrun. And he was sort of a de facto leader of a group of the Cambodians. He was an Anusauri Chai, Victory Monument in Bangkok, right next to his apartment building, literally from like here to the door, was a 7-Eleven. And on December 22nd, 2019, about 9:30 in the evening, he wasn't feeling well, so he went to get some medicine at the 7-Eleven. As he stepped back out of the store, these two Cambodian guys accosted him. They're big guys, had the appearance of bodyguards. And they said to him, "Please come with us, brother. Our boss needs to talk to you. You messed up." And so fearful for his life, he ran back into the 7-Eleven, and these guys followed him back in. And they demanded that he go. Meanwhile, they're saying to the 7-Eleven staff, "Hey, Thai police," even though they weren't. And when he refused to go, they pulled out tasers. And they started tasering him in the 7-Eleven. Him out. Tasering him. They did drag him out. There was a van parked across the street. He managed to grab onto a chain link fence and pull away. They were still tasering him. He escapes from them, runs back into the 7-Eleven. They chase him back in and continuing tasering him there again. Finally, the Thai staff, I think, got over the shock and said, "Look, you can't do this. Or, stop it." But the real thing that stopped the attack was the batteries on the tasers ran out. They had tasered him so much that they just ran out. I mean, I guess when you're going to abduct somebody, you should make sure that you have new batteries in your taser. But, and this guy, so he gets back to his apartment, he calls me. And, he's sending me photos of all the injuries all over his body. We had another case, a politician, Ta Nimon. On November 23rd, 2019, he and his wife are at the Big C in Bangkok. At least 8 plainclothes Thai officials, police officers, they surrounded him inside the store. They took him outside. There were more plainclothes police waiting outside. They put him in a van. They handcuffed him to his wife. And then they drove around for an hour or two until they were met by another car full of Cambodian officials. Those Cambodian officials took him, and then they drove him straight to the border. This guy had a UNHCR card. He's a refugee. They just took him straight to the border. And when they got across the border, they said to him, "Okay, we're taking you to Phnom Penh. Don't try to run. We don't want to have to shoot you." And they were armed. These were Cambodian guys who were armed, carrying guns in Thailand, taking him across the border and then back across. And the next day, he was in Phnom Penh giving a press conference denouncing the political opposition. So this is the kind of cooperation we see. We've got cases from Laos. We've got cases of Thais who have been disappeared in Cambodia and in Laos. We've got the lights going out. Yeah, the batteries are out. I'll tell one last story, and then we can all open it up for questions. This past April 13, 2023, several unidentified men abducted a guy named Duong Van Thai, who's a Vietnamese rights activist and independent journalist. And he was also a UNHCR recognized refugee. He was riding his motorcycle back from a coffee shop. It was pretty clear that someone had identified where he was. He was targeted by a snatch squad. He'd been speaking out on YouTube. He'd been criticizing the government on Facebook. He was also apparently had some connections with some people in Hanoi where he was getting inside information. So the Vietnamese wanted to shut him up. The day before he was abducted, he had actually visited the UNHCR Bangkok office because he was going to be resettled in the coming days. I saw the video. There was a video that was ultimately turned into police of the abduction. And it turned out that, in fact, it was a Vietnamese government snatch squad that had come in. And we found out about this because it was an unauthorized operation. and there were actually representatives of the Thai military counterintelligence who were unhappy about what happened here. And I said, well, you know, they were investigating and they were trying to talk to different people. We had done an earlier investigation, so they were sort of piggybacking on what we had already done. And I said to him, so, okay, and it was, you know, surreal. I'm talking to this guy in Thai. He's speaking fluent Vietnamese with a Vietnamese. You know these people exist, but you don't really see them until they come out and talk to you. And I'm talking to this guy, and I'm saying, like, well, why are you unhappy about this? This has happened previously in other cases. He said, yes, but if they're going to do that, they have to come and ask permission. They didn't ask permission for this one. An acknowledgement that the Thai government does this. You know, and so they were unhappy, not because this person had been taken away, not because this person is facing trial in Hanoi, not because of all the things that happened, but because the Vietnamese government did it in an unauthorized manner that didn't indicate that they respected Thai sovereignty. I mean, I think probably what's happened is the investigation has now gone cold. I think probably what has happened is that they scolded the Vietnamese and demanded something back from them for something like that. And this is the kind of swapping that goes on. So, you know, these are the most vulnerable. The refugees, the migrant workers. These are the people that are being taken advantage of. I haven't even started talking about the human rights issues related to political protests and what have you in Thailand. There's a lot to talk about there, but I think I'll stop there because you probably all have a number of questions you want to ask. And, you know, thank you for your attention.
I have a question, Phil. I have been under the impression that Thailand is safe. The kids walk around, walk home from school in Bangkok, anywhere, even safer than the USA. So I know you're talking about extreme circumstances, but overall, is Thailand safe in that regard? The feeling of safety among regular people? And I know it's not exactly what you were talking about.
Well, I mean, I think there's always a possibilities of crime and things like that. But I mean, much of the crime that happens, at least to people that look like you or me, are indirect. You know, it could be snatch theft, somebody stealing something on a motorcycle or what have you. I mean, I think that what you have is a kind of bully system where, you know, the police bully who they can. And when someone like my friend Tim Shearer shows up unexpected, they run away. So, I mean, I think that I mean, in terms of ordinary crime, I don't think that there is. I mean, I think it is generally safe to walk around. I certainly don't worry about my daughter when she's going around in Bangkok. But, you know, she's grown up in Thailand. She has a lot of influential friends. If she had a problem, you know, she knows that she could call somebody. The problem is that these migrant workers and these refugees don't know who to call, so they call me, and I do what I can.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. You paint a pretty grim picture. Can you give us some insights as to what effect you have to offset what you've done? For example, specifically, the guy that was tasered who ended up calling you, what did you do for him?
So we intervene on all these various different cases. In the case of Son Jamrun, we intervened. I talked actually to the head of UNHCR Thailand and said, look, this person is now under serious threat. I sent the photos and other things there. I said this needs to be prioritized. I called the U.S. embassy person who handles refugees. I talked to the European Union people who handle refugees. Everybody agreed that this guy now needs to get out of here. That, you know, it's no longer safe for him in Thailand. He needs to get out. And so they fast-tracked his case. And he was resettled as a refugee to New Zealand. He's now in Auckland. So a lot of times it's sort of, in some ways you're helping people get some sort of protection or get safe. That's all we really can do. I mean, in terms of policy, we're going to put out a expose on some of these kind of cases probably at the end of April. So some of the cases I've been talking about you'll see on the Human Rights Watch website. And, we'll demand that there's accountability. We'll demand that the government, for instance, ratify the Refugee Convention. We'll demand that they stop, these kind of deals with these other countries. We'll call for other reforms that need to take place. These are the sort of things we do. But, I mean, it's harder to get progress on policy than it is to, help sort of save some people. We have to balance both, because I can't handle every single case in the world. I mean, my office is right here. It's my staff is me, myself, and I.
This may be a little touchy, but I read recently about somebody complaining about a hotel accommodation on TripAdvisor, and they got in trouble for making the complaint. In fact, I think they got thrown in jail for a while. And it kind of made me think, like, well, if you complain about anything in Thailand, maybe you'll just get thrown in jail. Now, how does that apply to your operation? I mean, are you worried about getting thrown in jail?
Not really, actually. I have a lot of influence and connections. Yeah, I know what you mean. No, so the case you're talking about is that I think an expatriate complained about a particular hotel. He wrote a negative review, and he got hit with criminal defamation. I mean, this is one of the big problems in Thailand, is that there's this thing called criminal defamation, where, they view as like, if I say something against your reputation, I can be put in prison, which is absurd. I mean, as an organization, Human Rights Watch opposes criminal defamation in all forms. If you want to defame someone, that's fine. It should be a civil matter. You can take it to court and you can argue about a fine or something like that, the damage to your reputation. But people shouldn't be put in prison for that. In the case of this guy, I understood that, the hotel owner had connections with the local police. So then, the local police went and got the guy and arrested him. And, that was using the influence of the police to, to try to get him to recant and do whatever and undo the damage. But then, of course, it came out. And I think the real damage that was done to that resort and its hotel owner, because everybody started boycotting it with good reason. I mean, if you can't complain about bad service at a hotel without facing a lockup, I mean, who wants to stay there? Yeah. I mean, so I think complaining in Thailand is knowing about how to do it and also having some backing. I mean, I work for a big human rights organization. I've been here a long time. I know a lot of officials and things like that. So, if I had a problem, I already know the 5 or 6 people I'd call first. Well, I mean, Article 112 is criminal defamation. So, that is an issue. It is a big issue, and a lot of people in Thailand are talking about it. But now they're talking about it in a more quiet way, because there's been a lot of prosecutions, including people facing something like 50 years for a couple Facebook posts. So, this is a big issue. I mean, this is the issue, of course, that the international community likes to seize on. Is they like to seize on this because it's sort of salacious. Oh my God, you can't criticize the highest institution. Most Thais would not even think about doing that publicly, but privately they talk about it all the time. This really sort of accelerated after the military coup that brought Prayut Chan-o-cha and Prawit Wongsuwan to power. I think that they're getting benefits. They were getting deals. There was even allegations that Prawit was getting money for these things. But they were solidifying contacts with their local neighbors. These are authoritarian governments. We've had cases where, for instance, now a number of Thai political opponents have disappeared in Laos. There was at least 5 of them that were disappeared. Actually, no, excuse me, it's 6. 2 of them were found, their face beaten to a pulp, tied up, disemboweled with concrete, put in their body cavity and sunk in the Mekong. Obviously, they didn't do a very good job because the bodies floated up. But these were political opponents of the military, and they had fled to Laos. They had sought refuge there, and it turned out that they weren't protected. There was another guy, his nickname was Koti, who was a red shirt leader in Pathum Thani. He ended up saying some rather direct things about the monarchy during 2013 or so, and fled the country. This was actually when Yingluck was still prime minister. He continued to say those things while he was in Laos, including on sort of radio programs and things like that. And he was intercepted by armed men speaking Thai in Vientiane. His wife and his friend were tied up and left by the side of the road, and he was disappeared and has never been seen again. So, you know, these sort of things, you know, that, you know, as I was saying with that case of the Vietnam where, you know, they were unhappy that the snatch squad had come in and didn't have permission to do that, you can bet if there was a Thai operation going into Laos to do those kind of things that they would have had permission. So, you know, these are deals. There's a swap mart. It's like, okay, you give me this guy and I'll give you that guy. We had the case of Wan Chalem, what's his name? Last name? Satsakit, who was disappeared. He was actually taken in an SUV. He was on the phone with his sister when he was grabbed, and has been disappeared in Cambodia. We heard later from another Cambodian who was sent back from Thailand to Cambodia and is now resettled as a refugee in New Mexico, that the Cambodian jailers were talking about the deal. You know, that he was part of the deal for Wan Chalem. And Wan Chalem has disappeared. Cambodia said they don't know anything about him. The Thais say, well, what are you talking to us about? That happened in Cambodia. But, you know, it's a deal. We had 3 Thai people in Laos who, after these guys got grabbed and ended up in the Mekong, they fled into Vietnam. They were all red shirt, sort of anti-monarchists. They went into Vietnam. They were went in on fake Indonesian passports. And in fact, they made a critical mistake. They should have gone in. They should have gone straight to the airport in Hanoi and flown out. But I guess they were not clearly. They thought that Vietnam was, because it was a Marxist-Leninist state, was somehow favorable to left-wing revolutionaries like themselves. And they were picked up in Vinh in central Vietnam, and they were sent back in May 2019 and disappeared. Thailand denies that they were sent back, but we were investigating, and we were told by security officials, like, look, we know it's your job to investigate, but this is sensitive about the highest institution, and they're not coming back, so stop looking. And when you get a warning like that, you stop looking. Well, I mean, I think what we've seen is when Hun Manet came here in February, we had 6 refugees arrested. You know, one of them was actually in Rayong. You know, I've got photos of the special branch police outside his apartment. He was taking photos of them and sending them. They're like, they're coming for me now. What we were able to do is we were able to stop them from being sent back to Cambodia. So what has happened is these 6 refugees and their families will probably get resettled to a 3rd country. So they will finally get safe, but they're right now still in immigration detention. The difference between the Prawit government and the Seta government is that Seta is at least a little bit shy about offending the West in the sense of, like, you know, don't send refugees back into harm's way. So in this case, you know, they won't be sent back. And they basically have been given guarantees that they won't be sent back. But I'll give you another case. Remember the Russian band that was arrested in Phuket? This was what is it called? BI2, I guess. Yeah. So that was touch and go. That was touch and go because, you know, 4 of those guys were Israeli citizens. One of them was also an Israeli-Australian citizen. But 5 of them had flown into Thailand on their Russian passports. And technically, according to Thai immigration law, if you are going to be deported, you get deported back to the place where your passport's from, that you used to come in. Massive, massive negotiations behind the scenes. One of them was allowed to go to Israel. The rest were going to be sent back to Russia. U.S. and others intervened. Thailand realized that it would be more damaging for them to actually be sending people back to Russia. You know, that all the European Union and everybody else would get really angry at them. So they decided, okay, let's do a compromise. That's the difference. The difference with SETA and these guys is that you can talk to them. And at least, in some cases, people won't get sent back into harm's way to the country they fled from. They might get sent somewhere else. And that's what happened in that case. But, you know, I mean, it's also because SETA wants a free trade agreement with the European Union. They're negotiating that now. And if he sends a bunch of Russian musicians, and these guys have been playing since 1988. I had never heard of them before, but they're really, really prominent. I mean, they're sort of like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones all rolled together, you know, for the... so, you know, if you're going to send those guys back to Putin and they end up in prison, that would have a pretty bad effect on EU-Thai relations. They all got sent to Israel. So they were able to go to Israel and then go wherever they were going to go to next. Gaza, yeah. Well, no, that's a one-way trip. Yeah, I mean, well, you've already asked one. I mean, does anybody who hasn't asked a question want to ask one?
How do you prevent yourself from being very frustrated and angry at all the examples you've given and your inability to do real things about it?
Well, I mean, the bottom, people like say that, and they say, how do you do this work? And I just get pissed off. You know, when I get pissed off, I get energized and want to do more. So, I mean, if I got disappointed or depressed, it would be very difficult. But I get pissed off, so. And I do, I mean, I will say that, you know, I mean, I'm still in touch with some of these people that we've ended up saving. You know, that guy in Auckland. I mean, a Turkish Gulenist who was a international school administrator in Cambodia. We worked with a Canadian ambassador for like more than a year and a half. He was hiding in Cambodia right at the time that the Turks were trying to sweep up all the Gulenists and send them back to Turkey. And he was able to get across the border, and she went to the Thais and asked for a special favor right as she was leaving to give this guy an exit permit. And he successfully resettled in Calgary with his family and his 2 kids. We're friends on Instagram.
Well, I want to thank you for the work you do. And also thank you for the wonderful talk with the very powerful examples. So I'm sure those examples will stick in people's minds. And is this mic working decently? And a very small token of our deep appreciation, Phil, for doing the trip down here one more time. Thank you very much. Oh, I think there's good. No, we always take a photo of the presentation, so. Okay. Pattaya Mail likes it. Yeah, here she comes. Well, thanks, Phil. That was fantastic. Hope to get you back.